There are rare moments in the history of talent shows where the atmosphere itself seems to pause, as if time knows something extraordinary is about to happen. Malachi Bayoa's entrance on the stage of Britain's Got Talent was one such moment. The crowd murmured with curiosity, the judges adjusted in their seats, and millions of viewers watching at home felt the silent pull of expectation. From the very first second Malachi walked onto the stage, there was a quiet humility about him, yet at the same time, there was a sense of quiet confidence that betrayed the depth of preparation and the passion that lived within him. This was not just another audition, this was the arrival of a voice that would capture the imagination of a generation. Simon Cowell, often the most difficult judge to impress, leaned forward almost instinctively, as though drawn by an invisible force, sensing something remarkable was about to unfold. The anticipation in that room was so thick that even the faintest sound seemed amplified. Everyone wanted to see what this young singer had brought with him, and everyone was ready to be surprised. It wasn't just an introduction to Malachi, it was the introduction to a dream voice, the kind Simon Cowell himself had often spoken about but rarely encountered in reality. This stage, which had witnessed countless performers, was about to experience something unforgettable. When Malachi finally took a deep breath and released his first note, the entire auditorium seemed to shift into another dimension. The sound that emerged from this young performer's mouth was not simply singing, it was pure resonance, a crystalline tone that floated across the stage and wrapped itself around every heart in the room. It was the kind of voice that made people stop moving, stop breathing, and simply listen, as though they had stumbled across something sacred. Simon Cowell's face, usually guarded by layers of professional skepticism, softened into a rare expression of awe. His eyes widened, and his usual analytical stare was replaced with something far more vulnerable, admiration. Amanda Holden placed a hand over her chest, visibly moved, while Alicia Dixon exchanged a glance with Bruno Tonioli that silently communicated the same thought: we are witnessing greatness in its purest form. Malachi's voice carried the innocence of youth, yet it was infused with a maturity and control that is almost impossible to find even in seasoned professionals. Each note floated effortlessly, as though guided by something divine. The acoustics of the theater seemed to expand, amplifying the purity of his tone and allowing it to reach into every corner of the hall. Audience members leaned forward, mesmerized, some with tears already beginning to form. The beauty of that first phrase wasn't only in its technical perfection but in the emotional honesty it conveyed. Malachi wasn't just performing a song, he was opening a window into his soul and inviting everyone else to step inside. That moment, from the very first note, was when the performance transcended entertainment. It became a shared spiritual experience that left even the most casual observer shaken to their core. As Malachi continued his performance, each note seemed to tell a story, one that required no words, no explanations, only the pure power of music. The audience was not simply listening to a contestant sing, they were being carried on an emotional journey that dipped into valleys of vulnerability and soared into peaks of hope. His phrasing had the gentle touch of someone who understood not only how to sing, but how to communicate. The delicate transitions between registers, the way his voice effortlessly glided from the softest whisper of a high note to a fuller, resonant tone, gave his performance a fluidity that felt more like the rising and falling of waves than structured music. Some audience members closed their eyes, as though trying to hold on to the sound more deeply within themselves, while others gazed in disbelief, mouths open, unable to comprehend how such a young performer could carry such depth of artistry. The judges, too, were visibly taken into the flow of Malachi's voice. Simon, usually known for his sharp interruptions when he senses mediocrity, leaned forward and remained utterly silent, his expression one of rare reverence. Amanda Holden, overcome by emotion, blinked rapidly to contain the tears threatening to fall. Alicia Dixon looked like she was physically swaying to the sound, completely enveloped. Bruno Tonioli, a man who had seen decades of world-class performers, clasped his hands together, his animated nature quieted by sheer amazement. It was as though Malachi's singing suspended the ordinary rules of television talent shows, replacing competition with communion. Every note seemed to rise beyond the physical, tapping into something ancient and universal, the human need to feel, to connect, and to be reminded of beauty in its purest form. By the time Malachi reached the midpoint of his performance, it was no longer about whether he was good enough, it was about how profoundly he had already changed the energy of the entire room. The further Malachi sang, the more the audience became a reflection of the emotions he poured into every line. At first, there had been curiosity, people eager to see what this young contestant might deliver. But now, that curiosity had transformed into unfiltered awe. You could see it in the faces of people in the front row, their eyes shimmering with tears, their hands clasped tightly as though praying for the moment never to end. In the back rows, audience members leaned forward as if drawn by an invisible thread, unwilling to miss even a fraction of the sound. The quiet reverence was broken only by occasional gasps, those involuntary expressions of wonder that escape when something too beautiful to process unfolds before your very eyes. For a live television audience, accustomed to cheering, clapping, and shouting, this was unusual. It was as if Malachi had reminded them that silence can sometimes be the greatest form of applause. And yet, when he reached his climactic high notes, the control he displayed was met with thunderous, spontaneous applause, the kind that bursts out because people cannot contain themselves any longer. Some were on their feet before the song had even finished, breaking the usual pattern of waiting until the end. Parents in the audience looked at their children differently, perhaps imagining that greatness can live within any young soul if given the chance to bloom. Couples held hands tighter. Even strangers glanced at one another with knowing smiles, as if to say, "Are you feeling what I'm feeling?" The performance became more than just a showcase of talent, it was an awakening of the collective heart of the room. Malachi wasn't just singing, he was teaching everyone the power of vulnerability, the necessity of beauty, and the rare miracle of a voice that seems to touch the divine. By the time he sang his final note, the atmosphere had completely transformed. The theater was no longer just a performance venue, it had become a sanctuary, and Malachi its unexpected guide. When the final note faded into the hushed air of the auditorium, the silence that followed was almost as powerful as the song itself. For a few seconds, no one moved. It was as if the entire room collectively held its breath, reluctant to shatter the sacred stillness Malachi had created. Then, like a wave crashing onto shore, the applause erupted, thunderous, unstoppable, a tidal surge of emotion pouring from thousands of hands and voices. But what struck viewers most was not just the audience's reaction, it was the transformation visible on the judges' faces. Simon Cowell, a man who has built his reputation on sharp critiques and relentless standards, sat completely still, almost stunned. His eyes glistened in a way rarely seen, his usual smirk replaced with an expression of deep respect. This was not just admiration for technical talent, it was recognition of something rare, something that transcended even his decades of experience in the music industry. Amanda Holden, visibly moved, was the first to rise to her feet, clapping through tears that now freely streamed down her face. Alicia Dixon, overwhelmed by the emotional honesty of the performance, had her hands pressed against her cheeks, her eyes wide with wonder. Bruno Tonioli, known for his exuberant reactions, was momentarily silenced, then suddenly leapt to his feet in a burst of uncontainable energy, applauding with every ounce of his being. Their words that followed were filled with praise, but more importantly, they were saturated with awe. They weren't just judges commenting on a performance, they were human beings acknowledging a once-in-a-generation gift. Simon's voice, when he finally spoke, carried a sincerity that struck everyone. He described Malachi's performance not just as incredible, but as a dream, admitting that voices like his are what he has spent years in